July 2nd, 1937. Somewhere over the vast Pacific Ocean, Amelia Earhart's voice crackled through a radio for the very last time. "We must be on you, but cannot see you. Gas is running low." Then complete silence. For decades, the world has called it a great unsolved mystery. Investigators searched for wreckage, chased conspiracy theories, and imagined dramatic scenarios of capture or crash landings on deserted islands. But the real story isn't a mystery at all. What really sealed Amelia Earhart's fate wasn't the endless ocean, a catastrophic mechanical failure, or even enemy fire. It was a frequency written on the wrong line of a telegram. It was an antenna removed just to save a little weight. It was a ship commander who knew the right answer but never spoke up. You see, the technology to save her existed. The knowledge to use it existed. What didn't exist was someone willing to take responsibility for getting the small details right. This isn't a story about fate. It's a story about how a legend died because nobody double-checked the math. By 1937, Amelia Earhart was already a global icon. She'd crossed the Atlantic as a passenger in 1928, becoming an instant celebrity. But she wanted more than fame by association. So, in 1932, she piloted a plane solo across the Atlantic, battling storms and engine fires for 14 grueling hours. When she landed in a field in Northern Ireland, her face covered in grease, a farmhand walked up and asked if she'd flown far. Her simple reply, "From America." These incredible achievements brought her into powerful circles. She became close friends with First Lady Eleanor Roosevelt. She even lobbied President Franklin Roosevelt directly, writing him letters that started with apologies for being a troublesome female flyer. The president listened. When she needed a runway built on a remote Pacific island for her round-the-world flight, Roosevelt approved the entire project in just 4 days. Her planned route was audacious. Previous circumnavigations had taken northern routes, staying close to land. Earhart chose to fly near the equator, making her journey the longest ever attempted. The final leg would be the most dangerous of all, crossing the entire width of the Pacific Ocean. The Pacific is just enormous. If you look at a globe from certain angles, you see almost nothing but water. Back in 1937, most planes could only fly a few thousand kilometers before running out of fuel. So, Earhart stripped her Lockheed Electra of everything non-essential. She ripped out the insulation, which made the engine noise so deafening that she had to communicate with her navigator, Fred Noonan, by passing written notes. She replaced passenger seats with massive fuel tanks, basically turning her plane into a flying gas can. She packed almost nothing, telling her husband that extra clothes and food meant extra weight and extra worry. Even with all these changes, the Electra's maximum range was somewhere between 6,600 and 7,200 kilometers. And that was under perfect conditions. It might just reach Hawaii from New Guinea, or it might fall disastrously short. She desperately needed a refueling stop. Halfway between Australia and Hawaii lies Howland Island, a tiny speck of land just over 2 kilometers long and less than a kilometer wide. The U.S. had claimed it decades earlier, but by 1937, it was barely inhabited and had no runway. But Earhart's high-level connections solved that problem. 3 airstrips were cleared specifically for her flight. The real challenge wasn't landing, it was finding it. Navigator Fred Noonan would use dead reckoning calculating their position based on compass, airspeed, and wind. But tiny errors add up over vast distances. As a backup, Noonan would use celestial navigation, measuring angles to stars in the sun. But earlier in their journey, these methods had been slightly off. Overland, that just meant finding another airport. Over the Pacific, there were no second chances. So, Earhart arranged for 3 U.S. ships to be stationed along her route. The Coast Guard Qatar Itasca would wait at Howland Island. The Ontario would be positioned halfway. The Swan would sit between Howland and Hawaii. The Itasca was supposed to send up smoke signals as she approached. But most importantly, all three ships had radio. Radio was the modern technology that was supposed to save her. Radio was meant to guide her to that tiny island in an endless ocean. Radio was the critical system, and radio was about to fail in the most preventable way imaginable. Radio technology in the 1930s was still pretty new. The German physicist Heinrich Hertz had only discovered radio waves. About 50 years earlier, he made electrons oscillate in a transmitter, and a few meters away, a simple loop of wire with a tiny gap would produce faint sparks. Hertz discovered something critical. When the receiving loop was parallel to the direction of the wave, the sparks were strongest. When it was perpendicular, they disappeared. This null was the key. He himself couldn't imagine the future he'd created, saying, "I do not think that the wireless waves I have discovered will have any practical application." He was wrong. By the 1920s, radio broadcasts were everywhere. Ships and planes routinely used it for Morse code. Earhart's plane had 5 different antennas. Her most critical equipment was a loop antenna designed for radio direction finding. It worked on the same principle Hertz discovered. A pilot could rotate the loop until the signal disappeared, finding that null. That null would point directly to or away from the radio source. A second, smaller sense antenna would tell you which direction was correct. Finding that sharp, clear null was far more accurate than just flying toward the loudest signal. This was the system that would guide her to Howland Island. All she needed was for someone on the ground to transmit the right signal, and all the ship needed was for Earhart to tell them which frequency to use. What happened instead was a cascade of small failures, each one survivable on its own, but together they created a perfect storm. 4 hours after taking off from New Guinea, Earhart radioed an update. Everything okay. But she never acknowledged the calls from the ground crew trying to warn her about stronger than expected headwinds. Her receiving antenna was likely already broken. She couldn't hear their warnings. "Nini Aurizin," she expected to pass the ship Ontario. She listened for its Morse code signal. She heard nothing. The day before her flight, Earhart had sent an urgent telegram asking the ship to transmit constantly. That telegram never reached the Ontario in time. They passed each other, invisible, in the night. At this point, Earhart faced a critical decision: turn back to New Guinea or push on toward Howland. This wasn't even her first attempt. Months earlier, a takeoff crash in Hawaii had forced major repairs and a route change. During that time, her expert radio operator, Captain Harry Manning, left the crew. So now, alone with her navigator, she flew on into the darkness, completely unaware that the most critical failure was still ahead. Around 6:15 in the morning, local time, radioman aboard the Itasca heard Earhart's voice, loud and clear. "Please take a bearing on 3105. We'll whistle into the mic. We are about 200 miles out." The men were confused. Their direction-finding equipment couldn't work on that high frequency. Her voice signal would just bounce off the atmosphere and come from all directions. There would be no nulls to find. In the cockpit, Earhart heard only static. Almost blinded by the rising sun, deafened by the engine roar, she twisted the radio dial, listening for a response. Nothing. The confusion was deeper than anyone knew. Earhart, the Itasca, and Howland Island were all operating on 3 different time zones. When Earhart said she'd listened on the half hour, the Itasca's own transmissions blocked her next message. They radioed back, cannot take a bearing on 3,105. Very good. Please send on 500. But she couldn't. She had removed the long trailing antenna needed for that low frequency. Since neither she nor Noonan were skilled with Morse code, she saw it as dead weight and had it taken out after the Hawaii crash. She had no way to send a signal the Tasco could track, but she could still track them. Before the trip, she consulted an expert who told her to have the Itasca transmit on 700 feet. He meant a wavelength of 750 meters, which is 400 kilohertz. But Earhart mistakenly requested a frequency of 7,500 kilohertz. She told them if frequencies mentioned unsuitable, inform me. No one ever corrected her. At 7:42 a.m., her voice came through so loudly that men on the Itasca ran on deck, expecting to see her plane. We must be on you but cannot see you. Gas is running low. She frantically called again. We received your signals, but unable to get a minimum. Just before 9 a.m., her voice burst through one final, desperate time. We are on the line 157 to 337. We are running on line north and south. Then, silence. The evidence is clear. She ran out of fuel and crashed into the Pacific. The disaster was inevitable. The Itasca's commander, a man named Thompson, knew her direction-finding equipment wouldn't work on high frequencies. He had the knowledge, but he never took responsibility for correcting her mistake. If Earhart had simply used her loop antenna to listen after her main receiver broke, she would have heard the Itasca's messages. They could have sorted it out. She would have found Howland Island. What killed the legend wasn't a grand mystery. It was a frequency written on the wrong line, a piece of equipment left behind, and a commander who chose to stay silent. It's a powerful lesson that sometimes the biggest disasters are caused by the smallest, most preventable mistakes. Thanks for watching. If you found this story as fascinating as I do, be sure to like and subscribe for more deep dives into history.